My name is Ashley, and this is Let's Talk Dispatch.
I do. You're gonna do it really well.
And I believe the world needs more dispatchers.
Around in the mud, blood, and beer.
Years that I'm not working 4th of July. 4th of July.
Community policing, right? What about community dispatch?
So on this show, with the help of my guests, we will educate, empower, and support the heroes behind the headset. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode here of Let's Talk Dispatch with me, Ashley, the raspy dispatcher. I have officially made my way back on a graveyard shift, and I'm thriving, y'all. It is the best shift of life for me. I know that's not the reality for everyone, but I am so excited to be back on grave. So that means I'm recording this at 3 p.m. my time in California. And so that means I just woke up and I'm loving it. So today's guest is the Lieutenant Overtraining Further Center and the NCIC Training Terminal Agency Coordinator, and has been doing this since 1991 in the dispatch world. And very similar to me, they have a passion for making the world of dispatch a better place. My guest today, Sheila. Hi there. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am we were talking about before we got on here. I was like, I'm back on graveyard. I'm loving life. And that's probably sounds weird for a lot of people. But I really do much better when I'm working graveyard shift.
Yeah, that was my actual preferred shift was mid shift when we had 8-hour shifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't mind.
Mid shift is my natural circadian rhythm. So that was my
if only
great
they
for
based
my work life, not so great for my home life. But
only if they based our scheduling requests on our circadian rhythms, that would be a whole different ball game. Well, Sheila, tell us a little bit how you got into public safety.
It is a funny story. So I started dating my now husband. We met on a blind date, and he was a volunteer fireman for a rural county not far from where I lived. And we were out on a date, and they got a fire call. It came out as a grass fire. I got dumped at the fire station again. It turns out it wasn't a grass fire. It was a large log cabin that was under construction. But the lady that was reporting it was looking out some sliding glass windows. So to her, it looked like the back field was on fire. Mm-hmm. Again, small, very rural community. The fire chief came across the radio and said, if there's anybody at the station, answer this radio. Because they couldn't get their dispatcher to answer. That was my exact. That was me.
Can they see me?
I'm like going. I walked over and touched that mic like I was trying to pick up a snake. And which, if you know me, that would never happen. And so I keyed up, and I didn't know any radio jargon. I knew just a little bit of what I'd heard over the radio, And so I keyed up, and I said, "Hey, Randy, I'm here." And he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "This is Sheila, Greg's girlfriend." And he said, "Okay, next to the radio, there's a Rolodex." And he started telling me all this stuff that he needed me to do. And I did it. And then I started doing administrative stuff, volunteering, keeping up with their volunteer hours, learned some ins and outs. And then I was working at the time for a plumbing company and was just really not happy. And someone said, "Hey, I think the county where I live now is hiring for a dispatcher." And so I went in to apply, and I'll tell another quick story.
Please.
So when they called me for my interview, this was in 1990. It was in like October of 1990. And they set it up for I think it was a Saturday afternoon. And I thought that was kind of odd, but I was like, well, if you're going to work 24/7, why not do an interview on a Saturday? But I thought it was kind of cool because then I didn't have to take off work. So I
Mm.
show up in the dispatch office. They stick me in there, and they're like, the deputy chief and whoever else was interviewing me got called out on a call. Do you want to just hang out with us for a little while and you can see what this is all about? And I was like, okay, cool.
Very
And so
cool.
I'm sitting in there, and at the time they only had 2 dispatchers, and it was visitation day in the jail. So the phones were ringing off the hook, and so the lady that was sitting there, she says, "Do you mind doing me a favor?" Now I'm
Ooh.
expecting her to say, "Can you go get me a Coke?"
And,
Or
like, have you talked to Randy? Do you know Randy asked me for favors too.
I said, "Sure." And so she turns the admin phone around and she says, "These 2 lines are the jail lines, and it's just gonna be people asking about visitation. Here," and hands me a piece of paper. "Just tell them this." And I was like, "Are you sure?" Like, "Okay." So I answer the phone a few times, and she's right. It's just people asking questions. I read from the little script, and then all of a sudden I answer the phone, and it's this guy. And just for the people listening, I live in northern Mississippi,
Mm,
right outside of, my boss says that we're a suburb, that Memphis is a suburb of Olive Branch, Mississippi, but that's
okay.
where I live. So we're in the very northern part of the state. And at the time, way out in the county was it's still pretty rural in some areas, but out there it was really rural back then.
Mm.
And I answer the phone, and it's this guy, and he's like, "I think we're going to need the sheriff's department down here." And I said, "Okay, sir, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, me and my buddy, we was duck hunting, and we went around this tree, and there's a body chained to this tree, and it looks like the guy's been shot."
Oh
And I
my
said, "Tell me again where you are."
and you just start reading the visiting script, like
And I'm like, "Okay." So I write down his name and the name of the little convenience store where he had driven to, because back then there were no cell phones. You
yeah.
had to physically go to find a payphone.
Wow.
And so I said, "Okay, sir, I hate to ask you, but can I place you on a brief hold?" And he says, "Yes." And so I put him on hold, and I turned the phone around to Bonnie, and I said, "I don't think I'm qualified to talk to this man." And she said, "Why? What does he need?" And she was, she wasn't being snarky, but, they were just really,
Busy,
really
yeah.
busy. And I said, "I don't know, something about a body chained to a tree. Looks like they've been shot. They're out in," I told her the area they were in. And here's his name. And I'm guessing that the chief deputy is going to still be busy, probably not going to do this interview today. So I wrote down my name and my phone number again, and I said, "Just tell him to call me, and we'll have to reschedule this." And she's like, "Okay." So, like, it was like 3 weeks, and I thought, well, I guess they're never going to call me. And
Yeah.
the chief deputy called me, and so I went in expecting to go in for an interview, and he just had me read some stuff. And then back then they would make you do a simple math test, which I
Mm,
thought was really odd. And I was like,
yeah.
then he had this big, huge wall map, and he was like, "Go over there and find this and this and this." And he starts, rattling stuff off to me. And he said, "So, something about something being east of somewhere." And I'm looking on the map, and I'm not real good if you put me in a room and tell me to point south. I'm
Mhm.
not your girl.
Yeah.
Looking at a map, I do a little bit better. And so I did what he asked me to do, and I turned around, and there was 2 other, people in uniform. At the time, I had no idea who they were. And he said, "Okay, can you start on New Year's Eve
The
at 10 p.m.?"
disrespect.
And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we got to take it before the board of supervisors, but you're pretty much hired if you can start on New Year's Eve at 10 p.m." And then they called me the next day and sent me to get uniforms. I was just like, this is the oddest thing ever. But this is the part that always blows people's minds. I took this job. At the time, we made $1,000 a month,
Oh,
and we got a uniform stipend and no benefits.
wow. Man, you held in there. So they were real disrespectful in your hiring process. You're like they were like probably before you walked in the room, like, look, she already took a dead body call. Like She did just fine. If she can
Yeah,
do a map, we'll hire her.
yeah. So that's what Miss Bonnie told them. They were like, she told me after I've been there about 6 or 7 months. She said anybody else would have probably run out the door. She said, and you were just like, sir, can I place you on a brief hold?
And it's so funny, like when you handed off that call, was she like, oh, okay? Or was she like, oh, dead body? Like,
Yeah, because back then that was a
yeah,
very unusual call for us. I mean, it's not extraordinarily common now, praise goodness, because
yeah.
I'm not about that. But sounds funny. You've been in the business this long, but
Mhm,
there's just a lot that has to be done when you get a call like that. A lot
mhm.
of notifications, then you have, all the other stuff that goes with it. So it
Yeah.
was very unusual back then. And that's what she told the sheriff. He was like, well, I mean, how good is she? And Miss Bonnie was telling me later, she was like, she didn't even blink hard.
She was like, yeah, she pretty much passed psych with that. We're
Yeah, but
just the right level of crazy, like,
yeah,
guy
cause
tied to the tree.
yeah, I was just so naive that
Mhm.
I, at that point, being so naive really helped me out.
But what a wonderful example. And I mean, for you, extra because you weren't in the job, but for folks listening, like we say it all the time, you literally never know what's gonna come over the phone. And I mean, at that time, you said it was an admin line they were calling in on,
Hmm.
right? So probably
Yep.
equivalent to our non-emergency lines today. And he's like, oh, got a dead body here, like just
When I first started at the sheriff's department, there was only one city municipality that had 911. All the 911 calls rang into the sheriff's department. We
Mhm.
had no, the 911 phone was literally just a telephone, a
Mm.
dedicated 911 line. We had three of them. And you didn't have any screens, you had no Annie, no Allie. It was literally just a phone number.
Wow. And so what was that like in the beginning for you when you were I mean, it was a rough interview process. You get the job, you show up on New Year's Eve, which is real disrespectful of them to do to you, by the way. Like, how was that in the beginning for you in that training process and
There
whatnot?
wasn't back then, there wasn't a trading process. There literally was not. There was no
Mm,
process. It was like, and because it was, I don't want to say it was simple,
mm,
but it wasn't as technic technical as it is now.
mm.
So, I mean, my trainer, the first thing he told me when I sat down, he said, pick out what kind of pen you like. And I said, what? He said, ink pen. Your ink pen is very important. And I was like, okay. Well, I mean, at the time I'm thinking, what does my ink pen have to do with anything? And so, but that was our original CAD system. And his best advice to me, and they tease me at work now because I have a particular kind of pen that I like, and
Heck
I purchased them myself, and I always have two of them because that was very important. You always had two ink pens because if one stopped working or you dropped one in the floor, you still had a way to take down your information, keep up with your officers.
Oh my gosh. And
So
I
I'm
say
like one of the few people that when CAD goes down, it
you
doesn't.
just smooth sailing. You're like, "This is
Yeah,
actually where I like to be."
yeah, it's annoying,
Whips out
but
the
it's
pen.
not. And yeah, it's not quite the panic for everybody else.
Oh, it's panic for me. I'm like, "No, no, no, no." I've avoided manual mode many times in my career, and I wanna keep it that way.
Yeah,
But I say all the time when I talk to folks who have been, like, doing this so long and have got to see the technology become implemented in, I don't know if I could have done this job pre-tech just because that's what I've grown up in. And the way folks dispatch back in the day is like hardcore, map books, and like no one not mapping your officers, no Annie Alley, no cell phones. 3 telephone 911 line. I mean, it's insane how far we've come really in a short amount of time.
It is. And it's on the really good days,
Mhm,
the technology does make the job easier. But
mhm.
anytime there's a glitch in the technology,
Mm,
it and people say it as a bad thing, and I don't think it's a bad thing. We are all we need our tech because
yeah.
we've become dependent on it.
Mhm.
Um, so when I was training this last group of dispatchers that went out on the floor, I was explaining to them, I was like, showing them how to use a map book, showing them how to read the wall map, showing them the tricks that we have for when CAD goes down so that you know which precinct that's in or which ward that's in or which ambulance that's in because we dispatch for it all. I now work for a municipality. I stayed at the sheriff's department about not quite 2 years, and then I came to work for the city mainly because I needed some health insurance.
Hmm. I hear that.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I needed some health insurance. But I tell them all the time when that F5 tornado comes through, because
Mhm,
we live in a tornado prone area, and
mhm,
we also live on the New Madrid fault line. Um, the area that we live in, back in, I don't know, remember the date, but
mhm.
there's been earthquakes here that were so strong it made the Mississippi River run backwards and created a
No.
recreational area now we call Reelfoot Lake.
Wow.
So it's happened. And I
Wow.
always tell them, we always have to remember the possibility is there, the probability is low,
Mm,
but we train for the possibility
true.
and we're prepared for the possibility. And so they were like, I said, if a tornado comes through, you don't have cell phones because tornadoes like cell phone towers. They eat them. They're like a little snack. It's like a little candy. And they take the cell phone tower and they throw it through,
Mhm.
miles and miles away. We'll find parts of the cell phone
Oh
tower.
my
And
gosh, yeah.
you know, so we have to be prepared because as much as dispatch depends on tech, so do our officers and our firemen and our paramedics. And
Mhm,
they're going to be screaming to you for directions.
mm.
And so I try to tell them all the tricks and stuff we used to use back in the day when there wasn't any GPS.
Yeah, and I mean, it really goes a long way knowing those little things that, folks who have been doing this, like, have those tricks and tips, and, like, for folks who are
Hmm.
listening, you can learn so much from anyone in the room dispatching with you, especially folks who have seen, the tech be developed and implemented and knows what it's like to work without it because we are very fortunate to have the technology that we have now because it does essentially make our job easier most days. But there was a time where it wasn't there and we still did
Mm-mm.
this job. So it can be done. I'm a big supporter of technology in our centers and implementing these new things to try to make our jobs easier, a little less trauma filled, save more lives, all that good stuff. Um, and I know sometimes in our centers we don't like change. So, but there's good, there's bad. But at the end of the day, the purpose is to, save more lives, get to people faster.
Hmm.
So I'm all for that.
Yeah, and everybody always asked me when I was in college, I took public, you're required to take public speaking. And so I asked we had to do an informational presentation. And so I told the professor, I said, I want to do mine on the invention and implementation of 911.
Heck
And he
yeah.
literally looked at me and he said, it will bore people to tears. I said, if I bore them to tears, then grade me appropriately. I guarantee you I will not bore them to tears.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, it's one of the least celebrated things that the South has to offer.
Mm,
People like to make jokes about the South. We've heard them all. We make jokes about ourselves. We're okay with it. But, one of our claim to fame, first 911 call was made in Haleyville, Alabama.
yeah.
That's only 3 hours from where I live.
Very cool. Mhm.
And I said, this is where 911 was born, is
Mhm.
in the southern part of the country, and then
Mhm.
it just went from there.
Yeah.
I said, I said people don't realize they're just uneducated about their cell phones. When you get a new phone and you give your old phone to your baby to play with,
Yeah.
and then the baby wants it to be able to make noises, so you charge it up, and then
Mhm.
the 911 operator gets to hear your baby jabbering,
Oh
and we're
my
trying to find
gosh.
you. Back in the
And then that
day,
baby's mad at me.
yeah, yeah.
Why are
Trick
you
for
on
the
my
new
phone?
ones. Trick for the new ones. When you have a kid on the phone, identify yourself as Santa Claus's wife or Santa Claus's
Ooh.
mom or Santa Claus's, whatever,
I
and
think I'd make myself an elf.
tell them that you need to talk to mommy or daddy or whatever grown up is there. When they get to be a certain age, and they
Mhm.
will take that phone to a grown up.
Wow. I'm, like, mind blown right now that I never like, new dispatch level unleashed, like
Yeah, it's like, when you've got them and they're just talking, and you're like, "Can you take the phone to your mommy, or is there a grown-up in the house?" And then you'll be like, "This is Santa Claus's helper. I need to talk to a grown-up."
oh my gosh,
They
that's
will take the
hilarious. I
phone
can
to
already
them.
see my partner, like, turning and looking at me like, "Who are you talking to? Who are you
It
telling you're Santa,
works.
Ashley?"
Yeah, it works.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny, yeah. No, I really like that idea.
But that's a
Great
trick
idea.
before we had all the ways to find people, when cell phones were phase 1,
Yeah.
and all we had was the provider and a phone
Mhm.
number.
Mhm.
Yeah, you came up with all kinds of tricks, because those little pumpkins will hang up and call you right back.
Yeah, they will, for hours.
20 times.
Oh my god, that is
So,
hilarious.
but anyway, I did
Cool.
my speech, I did my presentation on it. People did not understand. They have, and I don't want to blame, but I say that I think the cell phone companies could do a better job at educating the people
Yeah.
they're selling their product to. A lot of people are under the misconception, like, if that their cell phone is somehow connected to their area code, and so
Mhm.
they think if they're in another area or another region, if they dial 911, it's not coming to a local PSAP. Um,
Mhm.
I've
Mhm.
had people, I don't know if you've ever had it, but I've had them when they dial 911, they think we're like a nationwide answering service.
Oh, yeah. I'll get it all the time. We're like, "Oh, I need" I'm in California, "I need ambulance in New York," and you're like, "What?" "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
How would I know who to call?
One of the favorite ones that I use in training is a gentleman called. He'd been involved in an accident. He wasn't from around here. And I'm like, "Okay, sir, what intersection are you at? Do you know what intersection you're at?" And he's telling me the main street that he's on. And I'm like, "Yes, but what intersection are you at?" He said, "Hold on, I'll give you the coordinates off of my GPS." And I said, "Sir, if you just look out the window and tell me what you see, I can find you." And he was like, "Oh, are you here local?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Oh, well, that's cool. I thought y'all were like just an answering service." And he's like, "I see this gas station." He told me the name of it, and I knew exactly where he was, but it was just like,
Yeah, the
"You're gonna pull
misconception.
your GPS," and I'm like, "Okay, it's gonna take me longer to type in those coordinates and find you than if you just tell me what you see."
And it really is true, like, the amount of misinformation that's out there in regards to, locations and cell phones. I remember at my old agency, I answered a phone and it was right on a border. And there was like a shooting. A shooting happened at like a house party. So the folks who were calling were fleeing it. And they're in their car and they're like, what street are you on? They're like, just map me. And I'm like, sir, if I could, I would. Why would I ask you if I already know where you are?
Yes.
But, and understandably, like people are in crisis. They're in, especially that situation. They're at a house party, it's a shooting, scary. But calling me with no information is not helpful. right? So taking a moment to before you dial 911 and at least have your location goes a long way, because if I get that, at least I get that. We got something to work with. If I'm spending 20 minutes convincing you that that's not how technology works, we're losing time, right?
Yeah, and then the other thing is another big way that cell phones changed um, dispatch was the call volume. So used to, we have a major interstate that runs through our city. And so used to, if you saw a wreck on the interstate, you had to go to the next exit, you had to get off, you had to go to the convenience store, you had to find the payphone, dial 911, and then, occasionally we would have someone that would be willing to go back to the scene.
Yeah.
Um, where now you get a minor fender bender at 5 o'clock at one of our major intersections, and we might get 15 phone calls and no one knows anything.
Yeah.
No one knows anything other than there was 2 wrecked cars and traffic's backed up.
Yeah. And they want traffic to get out the way, and it's our
Right.
job to teleport them out of the way.
Yes.
It's just
And so a lot of centers, we have to have an extra person, just because when there is something, a lot of times it's not even that major. When the officers get there, they might need 2 wreckers, but no one's bleeding and no one's dying, and we might have gotten 15 911 calls for that one fender bender. Where even 10 years ago, we would have maybe gotten 3 or 5 calls, and the majority of the time, one of those calls was going to be someone that was in the car. And I don't know about y'all, but now we have all these, the crash thing or the thing on the phone.
the OnStar or the Apple Watch.
Yes.
Man.
So I'll take a little sidebar. Funny story about Apple Watch. So this one night we kept getting the call from the Apple Watch, fall detected. And we could hear in the phone, and we didn't have rapid SOS yet. And it wasn't, I guess because it was an Apple Watch, it wouldn't give us hardly any location information. Like, we had a general area. And it just so happened these people were in an apartment complex, and it's a 3-story apartment complex.
Yeah.
Well, I knew which end of the building, but that only narrowed it down by 6 apartments. And I keep listening, and I'm like, I think it's a disturbance, y'all. And so my partner picks up, and she's listening. She's like, yeah, I think it's a disturbance. So we messed with it. We went into our report system and were able to find an address by the phone number.
Okay.
And we sent an officer over there. This is what I tell people now. Folks, take off your Apple Watch if you're a grown-up doing grown-up things in the middle of the night. It thinks you fell.
Cell phones, technology, you gotta love it,
The officer was like, dispatch, everything is very secure at this location. Then he called us later, was telling us, we were just dying laughing.
Oh my gosh. It's funny. That open line does call 911 when people are bonding.
Yes. It's been interesting. It's been interesting when I think back at the progression of things.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I mean, for me, technology has been in the last 5 years, I feel like has boomed in 911. Like text to 911's been implemented at my agency. Rapid SOS, Rapid Deploy, those type of companies are now integrated into our systems. We at my last agency, I had this system called ShotSpotter. Like, there's all this tech that I've seen grow in the last 5 years. So I can only imagine, being a dispatcher since 1991, how much growth in tech you got to witness, implement, hate, love, all the things.
Yeah, I like Rapid SOS. I'm not as comfortable with it as I want to be. So working on that. But some
Mhm.
of it has been fabulous. I mean, it's great because we can find people that truly are unable or don't have any idea where they are.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but the lack of education that has been rolled out to the general public, I think not only does a disservice to 911 dispatchers, but it does a disservice to the people
Mhm. It really does. It
because
really does.
they just don't know and they just don't understand. They don't understand. If you're not, I always tell when I do my little public speaking or when I ask questions, or I always tell people if you are not able to or you are unwilling to stop and render aid, and it's not 3 o'clock in the morning and you've seen at least 3 other cars drive by, you probably do not need to call it. We more than likely know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely it's one of those, like, things where you, like, see something, say something, like, you don't want someone not to call because if it's like weird things end up being things sometimes. Um, but there is definitely a misunderstanding of when to dial 911 and when to dial a non-emergency number.
Mhm.
Like not your lack of willingness to locate a non-emergency number for a non-emergency call doesn't mean you just should dial 911. It's just
Yes.
because we as dispatches we hear it on like, oh, it's not an emergency. Oh, I didn't know the non-emergency number. And it's like, I mean, we all have access on our phones to Google, and it's just you should, if you're listening now and you don't have it in your phone, you should have the non-emergency to your local department that you're spending the most time in. And if you work in a different city, that place too,
Right.
in your phone, because you don't want to have to look for it when you're feeling like you need to contact us. But to tie up a 911 line is irresponsible when it's not a 911 situation, right?
And so I'll tell people, um, sometimes depending on the nature of the call, and I will tell them, I'm going to go ahead and take your information. But in the future, if this happens,
Mhm.
this is truly for the non-emergency line.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so far, that's worked a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know.
Um, yeah. But I do have a question
Sure.
in regards to how you folks dispatch like tornadoes and stuff. So I went to school in Iowa, and tornado weather, in my personal opinion, is terrifying.
I am Let me tell you. Okay, so I was the lead before I was promoted to lieutenant. We have, dispatch, then you have a dispatch lead, and then you have, well, now we're ranked lieutenant. We didn't have
Mhm.
rank for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, and my shift was working and the weather was really bad. And so I called um, the senior dispatcher that was working, and I was like, "Do you need me to come up there?" Because I knew they were about to have to activate the tornado sirens. Now we
Mhm.
live in a tornado-prone area. You
Mhm.
set those puppies off, and you wouldn't believe the people that call 911 and go, "The tornado sirens are going off. What do I do?"
Oh my
Um, the
gosh.
right answer is not stand in front of your window and call me back when you see the tornado.
Yeah.
That's not the right answer. No, we have to tell them to seek cover or whatever. But
Mhm.
so I called her because I knew they were about to have to set them off, and I knew they were going to get really, really busy.
Yeah.
And she said, "Do not try to leave your house right now." And I said, "Well, I'm looking out the window." And about that time, we have these big blue garbage cans for the
Mm.
city to come pick up our trash, and they're really big. And
Mhm.
about that time, I see 3 of them go down my street,
Mm.
you know, unassisted.
Yeah,
They're
Sheila
just
was like,
taking a
"Well,
walk
I
behind
should
me.
go down the street too."
Yeah, and, then my storm door on my back door just blew open and slammed shut, and I opened up the wooden door to s to see if it was broken, to see if it had pulled it off the hinges, and there was so much force against the door that I couldn't push it open.
Ugh.
So I still have my senior dispatcher on the phone, and I'm like, I'll be there. I can get there if you need me. And she was like, just stay home. And um, right after she hung the phone up with me, we actually, the tornado never touched down, but it
Okay.
blew over. And so when that happens, it causes a phenomenon called straight line winds.
Hmm.
So instead of tornadoes, you get 70, 80, 90-mile-an-hour winds.
Hmm.
And the wind caught the edge of the roof of our dispatch office and peeled 70% of the roof off of the building.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I'm going to be a proud mom here for a moment. I was so proud of my people.
Yeah.
My people handled it um, beautifully. They couldn't have done a better job.
Hmm.
Um, no one could believe the amount of damage. Luckily for us, the actual room where the radios are, a radio room, dispatch floor, everybody has a different name for it.
Yeah.
The roof was intact over it, and the front bathrooms. But pretty much the rest of the building, it looked like a sardine can.
So they were like, so we have bathrooms, we have radios, so no one gets to go home. We're good. We got
So,
you guys.
yeah, and it's not like a hurricane where you get days and days of warning, but typically, if you live in an area that's prone to tornadoes, you just kind of know. You know how to watch
Yeah.
the weather systems. You know how to watch the maps.
Mhm, mhm.
We're very fortunate because just on the other side of us, we call it the Mid-South area because it's actually Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee,
Mhm.
then Olive Branch, Mississippi. So when the weather's coming from Arkansas, when it
Mhm.
hits those bluffs in Memphis, right on the Mississippi River, that takes a lot of the punch out of the storms. Arkansas
Mhm.
gets it way worse than we do. Um,
Mhm.
but when it comes up from the south, from south of us, that's when we tend to have a lot of damage and tornadoes spawned around here.
Yeah.
So,
See, when I was, California kid, thin
mhm.
skin, okay, snow, weather, we don't do well with that here. And when I went to Iowa, my first winter out there, it was negative 32 degrees. And I was yelling at
Mm.
my coach. I was like, "You
Oh
did
my
not
goodness.
put this in the recruiting packet. We did not talk about the weather." And he was like, "Oh, Val, this is the worst weather we've had in centuries." I'm like, "Okay, this is probably what it was like last year. I don't want to hear that nonsense." But my teammates who are from the Midwest as well were terrified of earthquakes. And I was like, "We never get earthquakes." Like, I had a teammate's sister whose house got taken up 2 years in a row
Mhm.
by a tornado. And I was like, "This is like tornadoes for you folks are guaranteed. Like, it's a seasonal, it's like rain in the winter." Like, that is terrifying. Like, I could never do it. But they were like, "Oh, it's like they're tornadoes. It's fine." Like, it was just I was
And tornadoes are so weird. I mean, they're really weird. I saw we went when my husband was with the volunteer fire department. Went and worked in an area that had been hit by a tornado. And the oddest thing I think I've ever seen in my entire life was there was an old farmhouse,
Mhm.
and there was the concrete walkway going up to the farmhouse, and then the tall porch, concrete porch, and then there was nothing. The tornado took the house.
Mm.
The flowers, like these little yellow buttercup flowers that were lining the walkway up to the house, totally untouched, still sitting there. Um, a mobile
Gosh.
home that they had put in that was down near the barn, totally untouched. The roof of the barn was taken off of the barn and just sat over to the side of the barn. But it was just, I was like, really? It takes out the whole, and there was nothing left. Ashley, I tell you, there
Yeah.
was nothing left of this house. This concrete porch, 3 steps, and then there was nothing there.
Oh my gosh.
And like you couldn't even tell if you hadn't have been able to see the where the foundation of the house had been in the dirt.
Mhm. Mhm.
You would have never known. There was
Like,
nothing, not a stick, not a shingle, nothing. The
jeez.
house was just gone.
Yeah.
And but the flowers were, I'm like, what the heck? The buttercups are still fine.
Could you imagine, like,
Mailbox is
well,
still sitting there. The house is completely gone.
like they left it feels almost disrespectful, like they left the flowers as it's a gift? Like, it's
Yeah. I was just like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. I mean, they are scary, and I've been in a couple. We were when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, where we had damage to our house, but
Mm.
um, the storms fascinate me. It freaks my daughter out. I'm the
Oof.
one out on the porch watching them, and but I've studied the weather enough to know when I really need to, like,
Yeah.
the thing the night that the roof got ripped off of dispatch, I was like, I told my husband, I said, "I don't know, something really weird's happening because I can't even get the storm door open on the back of the house."
Yeah.
And that we had a storage room that got damaged, and a part of, like, we have a storage room that's attached to our house, and then we have a little freestanding aluminum or
Mm.
metal building of some sort, little storage room, and it had peeled back part of our roof. It didn't take it off. It just rolled it up. It looked like the Jolly Green Giant came and just rolled up the corner of the. So it's wild. They are wild.
Man, like, I seen watch the movie, I feel like it's Twister? Is it called
Yep,
Twister?
and Twisted
Yeah,
Two's coming out.
classic.
It's been way too long.
Is there a number 2 coming out?
That's what I've heard.
Oh my gosh. I remember watching that movie when I was a kid and just being like, "This is wild. People live these places, and these folks are chasing the storm." I don't.
Hmm. Yeah, for a while we were storm chasers,
Yeah?
but yeah, it's a very needed thing, but it's a very expensive hobby.
I
I was
bet.
like, yeah, my husband's a paramedic and he was on the unit for many, many years. So I was like, yeah, first responder is this, we don't, we can't afford these kind of habits.
Yeah. Oh my
We
gosh.
need some cheaper hobbies.
That's wild. Chase, I remember when because we were right near in Iowa. I think we're just south of this area called Tornado Alley.
Hmm.
And I remember the one thing I asked my coach, I was like, "Wouldn't Tornado Alley? Like, when's the last time you guys had a?" He was like, and we were in like a little town, and he was like, we don't really get, we've never really got one in hundreds of years, but it also doesn't snow there, so I don't know. And he was, they set the sirens off one day, and I kept going to my roommate. I was like, "Do we have to go down now? Do we have to go down the cell now?" Now, and she was like, "Ashley, I will let you know if we need to go. I won't leave you here. We'll let you know." I was like, "Okay." But they're like, "The sirens are going off. Do we need?" Because it was like a watch versus a warning, and I don't know the difference. But I just kept trusting my Midwest roommate to tell me
Yeah,
when I needed to go hide. But I didn't have to. I was good that night.
yeah.
So
So
crazy, crazy. So, we talked a lot about technology um and how it does fail us, and how can folks prepare, for when it is going to fail, other than having their handy dandy ink pen. What is something they can do to kind of ease into that crisis when it does happen?
practice.
Mm.
Practice makes perfect. So, and my crew didn't always love me for this, but it was 3 o'clock in the morning and we're kind of dead. And I'd say, okay, kids, the cats just crashed. Where are your people?
Mm.
Because you tend to, when you've typed it in
Mm.
and you're watching the clock just to know when you need to check on them,
Mhm.
you kind of mentally don't pay real close attention, or you might,
Mhm.
forget. I'm not saying that you'll always know, and it depends on how many officers you have working the street. And
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
in our facility, we dispatch for everything. I tell people if it says the city of Olive Branch on the side of it, we've got a radio or an on-call phone number. We have a way to get a hold of that person, from the
Mhm.
dog catcher to the sewers backing up to
Mhm.
my water ain't working, um, fire, EMS, police, all of the things.
Mhm.
But I always tell them, I call them my ducks on the pond,
Mm.
and I always want to know how many ducks I have on the pond. So don't be out there doing your secret squirrely stuff. If you
Mhm.
don't want to put it on the radio, we have an encrypted channel now. There's no scanner land here anymore. Praise the Lord. That has been amazing. Encrypted channel is the way to go. If you have any say so in your agency and they're
Mhm.
weighing on it, yeah, go with the encrypted channel.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Um, but so I'm always like, if you're out doing something, just let me know. And
Yeah.
you know, so I always tell them, to practice, just
Mhm.
practice it. Tell yourself mentally, hey, CAD just went down. Where's so and so? Where's so and so? Where's so and so? And the other thing is practice looking up the addresses in your city in your map book.
Mm. Mhm.
Now, the problem that we're having is the company that used to make our map books.
Mhm.
A lot of the map book companies are going out of business because people don't buy map books anymore. And it
Yeah.
was a smaller operation. We have a really great map book. It's broke down into grids. It's fabulous. They've always done such a wonderful job.
Mm.
But we haven't had a new map book come out since I think 2022.
Mm.
Or no, it was 2021.
Mm.
Uh, and so used to where we got them every year, and we would have them, and they were issued standard issue for every single officer. But you know, it's practice that makes perfect. And when you
Mm.
have downtime, practice that. Um, if you've given the opportunity, ride your areas, ride your cities, and
Mm.
just sort of know, even if you don't know the exact street names, but if you can associate the street names, or here we have subdivision names. I don't know if y'all have that in California, but if you can
Mm.
associate the subdivision names with the street names, then when your CAD does go down or when something happens, then you're just that much further up on the game.
Mm.
Tricks that I've used back when I dispatched for the sheriff's department or back in the early 90s when because a lot of our area didn't have street lights.
Mm.
So, 3 a.m. dark is 3 a.m. dark. And
Yeah.
when you're trying to find house numbers, and a lot of people just didn't display their addresses, it wasn't a big deal.
Mhm.
Um, so some of the tricks that we would use is, for especially for ambulance and fire calls, for some of the parts of the county, the streets or the houses are old farmhouses, and so they're
Mhm.
back off of the road a pretty good ways.
Mhm.
If some is there somebody there that can drive a vehicle down to the end of the driveway and turn on the emergency flashers?
Mm. Mhm.
People activate their emergency flashers when they've been in a wreck, but a lot of times the officers can see the cars. So if there's something going on at your house, if you can activate your emergency flashers on your car, it helps us locate the house a lot faster.
Mm.
Um, just those are just some of the tricks I could think of right off the top of my head. But I
Yeah.
always tell them, don't get so comfortable with your technology that you
Yeah.
forget how to function when it's not here. And so
Mhm.
I was kind of talking to somebody about that, and they were like, "Well, I mean, if your computer goes down in your office, they can just use their phone to GPS." And I was like, "Pumpkin, the whole cell phone tower is gone."
The tornado ate it.
It did. It was a crunchy little snack, and we'll find bits and pieces of it 4 or 5 miles away. Um, the other thing is, like, we dispatch for fire and EMS, and so a lot of times the firemen are really good, or the ambulance people too, but, um, because they drive the areas checking fire hydrants,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so a lot of times they're real familiar with everything in their area.
Yeah.
So if you and ask callers, um, the main, what big street is your house near?
Mm.
Because a lot of times, like if one of our main highways here is Highway 305, and when somebody's giving directions, if they say, well, if you turn off a Highway 305 onto such and such street, well, that's going to help you when when you don't have access to the technology that you're used to.
Exactly. Mhm.
So Those are just a few of the things I can think of. But what I tell people, I mean, I preach to our people, know know your areas,
Mm,
learn your areas. Some of it's going to come just when you're sitting in dispatch, because you're going to get calls to the same areas. But another thing is that we have a hard problem here. We have a huge industrial park, a
mm,
huge industrial park. We have multiple buildings there that are over 1 million square feet.
mhm.
911, what's your emergency? Well, Bubba just got hit with the backhoe. And I'm like, okay, where is Bubba? Well, we're right here at, XYZ company. Okay, when my ambulance gets there, where do they need to come in to get to Bubba? Oh, just come in the door, just come in the employee entrance. And a lot of times I'll say, okay, is it clearly marked on the outside that that's the employee entrance?
Mhm.
Oh, I don't know. Hey, is this say employee entrance on the door we walk in every day?
Someone just left a
Oh,
comment on my
please.
Instagram about that. Like, someone's like, "Just come to the employee entrance," and you're like, "Where's the employee entrance?" And they're like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a thing."
Um, so I mean, it's little things like that because I do believe that the stuff like that saves time.
Mhm.
The ambulance, even if they have a scene time of less than 7 minutes, it does no good if they're having to walk an entire 1 million square feet
Yeah,
because they parked at the wrong door.
yeah, no, 1,000%. Mhm, mhm,
So, and I mean, that's some of the things I try to pass on. But the main thing is get when you have the downtime, pretend in your head your cat just crashed and see how many of your officers you can jot down on paper really, really quickly and get their location right.
mm. So true, and it goes a long way, just that little practice, like, it's not perfection, we're not looking for anyone to be
Mm,
a CAD system themselves, but just reminding yourself that when in doubt, just having that awareness is going to go a long way if you
mhm.
are on shift when that crash does happen, because it will happen one day eventually.
And it's always at 6 p.m. on Friday
Oh, 1,000%. It's
when
always
the
at the
IT
most
manager
inconvenient
is gone to a conference or out of town.
exactly. When they
Always.
leave, we should also not be there. That's just my opinion.
Mm, I prefer to be there when they're not there, but
Well, Sheila, this has been an amazing conversation. As we wrap it up, I'm going to ask you the last question that I ask everyone, which is, what advice would you give someone who is considering a career in dispatch?
the biggest problem we have in our retention is people not understanding exactly. They think they hear, oh, yeah, I'm going to work nights, but then they don't consider exactly how that's going to affect their family.
Mm,
So I always tell them before you do this, think about next Saturday night and what's planned with your family, next Tuesday in your kids' soccer game or
mm,
whatever. And how are you going to feel when you're not there because you have to be at work?
mm,
If that is not going to cause you a lot of mental or emotional stress, then you'll do well.
mm,
A lot of times it's the work life balance more than it is the job. The other advice I always tell them is call your local agencies on their non emergency line and ask them what their policy is to come in and sit along.
mm,
Because people have a conception of where they live and what goes on in their town or their city. And sometimes when they go and sit in dispatch, they're really surprised to find out exactly how busy it is.
yeah.
Now, the area that I live in, for several years, I don't know if it was nationwide, but for several years, we were the fastest growing city in our area or the country or whatever. And
Mm,
so a thing just came out in Forbes magazine this week, and we're still ranked 36 out of the top 50.
Wow.
So when I say we've seen explosive growth, we've seen explosive growth.
Yeah.
And so people don't realize that we are very much a lot busier than we used to be. Just because when you have more people, you have more calls.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always bad. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, pestilence and famine, but we have 4 times the residents we used to have, and everybody has alarm systems.
Yeah.
And no one knows how to use them.
That part, or what the location is.
Or, yeah. All of the officers are still looking for Zone 5. If we could just find Zone 5,
Where
we could
is it?
solve all the problems. So that's what I tell them, is just go into it knowing. Because a lot of times it's or at least I've found in our area, because every area has different things. But in our area, the biggest thing, the reason, the majority of the time, the reason that we lose people is because of that schedule conflict of their work-life balance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Sheila, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
I'm so honored. I'm so honored at the work you do. Matter of fact, I just gave 2 seasoned. One of them's been in the business almost as long as I have. Your information. I was like, go to this website.
Yes.
He is rocking it out there in California.
Stop it, Sheila.
So anyway, yeah.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. And it's so awesome when folks reach out and they want to come on the show and they're like, in Mississippi, you know what I mean? Like we don't know each other. This is how we've met, this virtual connection in this moment here, and hearing your story, how you got into dispatch and how it's grown, it is really exciting. And I really do appreciate your willingness to come on and share that experience with everyone who's listening, including myself.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you giving me your morning.
I plan on doing nothing after this. So. All right, Sheila, thank you again so much. Thank you for your service, for everything that you do, for fighting those tornadoes so I don't have to. I really do appreciate it. I'll be right back with you, okay?
Okay.
All right, everybody. That was another amazing episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch. As Sheila said, technology is amazing. And I know a lot of folks who are not working in the dispatch first responder world don't have a great understanding of what we actually can do with this tech. But when it does fail, we do need to be prepared to respond and continue to do our job. So practice makes perfect. Practice pretending when your CAD goes down, how you're going to respond, what your game plan's going to be. So in those worst case situation, we're going to ease right through it. Like, subscribe, tell a friend, all the things. Until next time, everybody, stay raspy. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Let's Talk Dispatch, a Raspy Dispatcher production. If you liked the podcast, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and of course, tell a friend. If you want to be a guest, head to the raspydispatcher.com and check out our additional resources. Until next time, stay raspy, everybody.